Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you again on our channel. You know, FADAS AFRIC is a company of business intermediation and management. We work in the field of public tender contracts. We also intervene in the field of customs declarations, outsourcing, investment, and the financing, of course. That depends on your business needs. Our goal is to provide you with information on business opportunities and how to best manage them here in Togo and hence in the West African sub-region. Today, I'm going to explain to you how our country, Togo, is a real opportunity to be seized in terms of logistics and business, and this in several sectors of activity. Yes, Togo is really an opportunity to be seized. Indeed, the President of Togo, His Excellency Foy presided over an accelerating economic growth, averaging approximately 5% per year, except for 2020, due to COVID-19. Okay? If he and his government can maintain that, that will be a significant achievement in the global movement. Togo is becoming an increasingly attractive destination for foreign direct investment. The country is an opportunity for financial services, logistics, energy, education, health, agriculture, oil extraction, etc. All this is encapsulated in a national development plan and a strategic roadmap for the new 5 years period, 2020 to 2025. But Togo is already a key asset point to a large West African market of approximately 400 million people. Togo stood out as an outward-looking country, an internationalist country, and a vision driven by the president himself. There is a real opportunity to be deeper and develop economic trade and investment ties with the rest of the world. And we know the president is determined to achieve that. You have certainly heard some good thoughts about Togo. You know that Togo has accelerated its growth. You also know that Togo has positioned itself in the West African sub-region as a country that is really making considerable efforts to change its economic situation. But Togo is also seeking to have a better positioning among its peers. Since Togo has in its development plan, in its vision, a certain number of priorities which are closely linked to the regional context. For example, the fact that there are investments in logistics, in the business hub. There are also investments in a number of areas that benefit the entire sub-region. So, your first question might be to know from this capsule what innovations the Togolese government has introduced in its vision, and what information will enable you to get to know our country better. Well, the first thing is the considerable efforts that the government has made for infrastructure. But this has also put the country into debt a bit. So, how can we explain this priority that the government has given to infrastructure? What has Togo done in this particular area? Okay? Look, I'm sure that before the 2010s, very few people perhaps knew Togo internationally, if not anecdotally. So, this is an opportunity for me to talk about our country, and I hope to convince more investors and therefore attract more investment in Togo. Indeed, I think that in 2005, it starts with the end of a difficult story, the end of a crisis that has plagued the country. Since for 15 years, Togo has lost 15 points of growth rate. So, the infrastructure was dilapidated. We led a reconciliation process to stabilize the country. But the big issue, as we all know in our countries, is the economy. How to start the economy when confidence was reduced because of this long crisis. So the state has to make the first effort. Therefore, the first task was to be eligible for the heavily indebted Poor Country Initiative in order to have a reduction of the debt. Unfortunately, the country was on the fringe of the financial community because of the sanctions. As a result, this initiative allowed us to reduce our debt level, which was high, of 100%, only slightly though. We only reduced it to 40 or 41%. Nevertheless, it was necessary to invest, because without that, nothing was possible, and the investment had to be productive. So, Togo naturally chooses to invest in infrastructure because it corresponded a little to the vocation of our country. Togo has also been a crossroads of trade, a country of transit. But when you have an airport that is in poor condition, that has not been well maintained, when we have a port that is in a somewhat lethargic situation, no, you cannot do anything with that. and the roads were dilapidated while we depended a lot on other countries, because the port of Lomé has always been a free port. So it is a port that is also available to the hinterland countries. We told ourselves that if the state did not make the initial efforts, we will not attract the attention of the private sector. We will not draw attention to our country, and we wouldn't move forward. So that's why Togo took the risk of investing in the port. And this thanks to the support of its private sector partners, in particular MSC and Bolloré logistic companies. Togo has also built roads, because when you have a port, you need to have the rest. So Togo has built 1,500 kilometers of roads, more or less. The government has also invested in energy. And this has allowed us to have a growth rate of about 5%, except in 2020 because of the crisis linked to COVID-19. The debt, of course, has not exploded, but we were in 2016 at a high level, more than 80%. But today it has been brought down to a more sustainable level. Since we are below 70%, so we have made the reforms that are needed. Now, we are counting on partnership and the private sector to move forward. And the results are there. We now have the ports with the highest traffic in the entire Gulf of Guinea zone and in West Africa. The airport is one of the most modern. We have the corridor that is considered the most efficient one in the region, especially for the hinterland countries. So the infrastructure is already paying off after its considerable efforts. And as far as the aerial part is concerned, it has been rewarded. And this not only thanks to what Togo has done, but also thanks to the presence of Pan-African companies like ASCAI. Togo has been instructed within the African Union with the role of champion for the issue of open skies policy. This will allow precisely to increase air traffic between African countries. Togo has also been not designated, but let's say de facto the champion for maritime security. Because without maritime security, ports cannot really be protected in terms of capacity to increase traffic. Okay? These roads show that Togo has invested a lot at the regional level. So, how do we see the African continental free trade area? How do we see all this movement, which in reality extends even further what is already invested in Togo? On this subject, you know that being small has its advantages, but it also has many disadvantages. Generally, when you see investors coming to Africa, they look at Nigeria, they look at Senegal, they look at the Ivory Coast, they look at Ghana, and rarely at Togo because of the smallest of our markets. And so, very early on, Togo started through ECOWAS to be an advocate, always advocating for regional integration. Because we know that without that, we could not make it. Togo started with ECOWAS, and I say for this activism, we have been rewarded. Because Togo is home to several sub-regional banks. And this movement, initiated by the sub-regional banks, has been continued by the private banks, which now have their headquarters in Togo. So, this is one of the advantages we have. Secondly, if we don't have integration, if we don't have free movement, how can we invest in Togo? How can we reach Nigeria markets, Benin market, Ghana market, Burkina Faso market, etc.? It's impossible, isn't it? But at the same time, we know that by coming to Lome, thanks to our size, thanks to the size of our country, moving is less restrictive. By comparison, it is much easier to move in Lome than in Lagos. My Nigerian brothers and sisters will excuse me, but it is simply a physical law. So, this proximity, this closeness that we have with the investors gives us the advantage and allows us to solve the problem. That's why Togo is constantly advocating for integration. Otherwise, without that, countries like Togo would experience many difficulties. These investments that are made, the airports, the ports, are oversized if it was only to serve the small Togolese market. So, the African Continental Free Trade Area for us is an additional opportunity to have access to other markets. And this counting mainly on the private sector. You know, it's not the states that will invest in exports to Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, Burkina Faso, etc. But it is above all the private sector that will find a favorable environment there. It is the private sector that will be able, if it has to invest in Togo, to know that there are no market constraints. Because behind Togo, it is a vast market. It is ECOWAS and currently the African Continental Free Trade Area. I would like to point out that Togo has also ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. So, we strongly encourage investors to be interested in Togo. That's very important. Among the opportunities that were presented early, it is precisely the acceleration of regional integration that is important, okay? But How can I explain to you that, for example, a company like MSC chooses Togo as a center of operation for the region? So the port of Lomé now is more important than the port of Apapa, which serves Lagos, the port of Abidjan, and other ports. How can I explain to you, for example, that regional banks choose Lomé as the headquarters? You know, there are more of them than in any other city in Africa. How can I explain to you that a company like Askai, which is created to serve the sub-region, chooses Lomé? What's the attraction? How can we accelerate the elements that allow this attraction to continue and result in a lot more investment? Okay? I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. The first reason is security. Togo has relied heavily on security. And if you come to Lomé, people move around peacefully and safely. Secondly, it is a tradition of hospitality. Togo has always been a crossroad of trades. I was talking earlier about the free ports. I can also talk about re-exports. Indeed, 40% of the goods that arrive in Lomé are re-exported to other countries. Thirdly, I believe that this is also a desire. Now, we spoke earlier about integration, right? With the first banks that have been set up in the country, we can see that the government knows how to listen to companies that want to establish their headquarters in Lomé. The government knows how to listen to them. On the fiscal front, the administration and politics know how to adapt to the wishes of companies. And I think that the combination of these 3 factors largely explains the enthusiasm of companies to settle in Togo. Once you have BOAD, you have BIDC, you have EcoBank, the others follow the suit. By the way, in French language, BOAD stands for Banque West Africaine de Développement, which is the West African Development Bank. And BIDC stands for Banque d'investissement et de développement de la CEDEAO, which is the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development. Okay? So, there is an administrative framework that the government makes available to other investors who may follow. Now, how could we amplify this movement? I think one of the biggest challenges remains education. I think that a country like Togo, which is home to so many financial institutions, should have a first-class business school or a school where one can learn the banking profession, okay? Because we have all these banks in our country. Moreover, an effort has been made regarding the labor codes, the labor law. We have talked about education. In the social field too, there have been a number of games since the implementation of the new policies. In particular, the National Development Plan envisages a package of measures in the social field that are quite intense. Togo already has the advantage of having, for those who don't know, the lowest unemployment rates in West Africa and one of the lowest in Africa. So, this is already a gain, isn't it? This should allow a certain social peace. Now, since we have been talking about stability, one can wonder about the political situation, right? Can Togo reassure investors on the issue of stability? I know that this question is more than crucial for potential investors. Okay, that gives me the opportunity to talk a bit about these social aspects and then about the political aspects. On the social side, it's true that we have a fairly low unemployment rate. We owe this to the dynamics of Togolese youth, especially Togolese women who are very active. However, these unemployment rates may hide a reality which is precariousness, because most of these people work, but they are sometimes confronted with the phenomenon of poverty. What the National Development Plan brings is precisely to reduce this precariousness by allowing them to have higher incomes. Since Togo is modernizing its agriculture and other sectors with high added value, but also by allowing them to get out of the informal sector by providing tools such as micro-insurance. Because sometimes it's a little health problems that these people have. Micro-insurance thus makes it possible to resolve these illness issues, but also to reduce the level of underemployment through real higher incomes and regular incomes. As for the political situation, well, it got tense in 2017, but today that phase is behind us, and the constitutional reform that had been accepted by the entire political class have been implemented. In particular, we have the voting system and term limits that are guaranteed. We have organized legislative elections at the end of June 2019. I think if we haven't heard anything, then it's going well and it's calm. And in the following year, in 2020, we had presidential elections without incident. So, I think that to talk about stability, today the political system in place is comparable to what you will find in almost all ECOWAS countries. I'm referring here to term limits and the 2 rounds of voting. Another issue which, in my opinion, is of great interest to potential investors is the efforts that have been made to reform the business climate, okay? Because I have mentioned a number of elements such as taxation, the employment code. But there are other areas that are also important in terms of regulation. Togo really wants to become a business hub, and this is one of the priorities of the National Development Plan. Of course, Togo must be perceived as a country that has all the assets to attract investment. And we realized that Togo was ranked by the World Bank in the latest Ease of Doing Business as the first reforming country in West Africa and among the most reforming in Africa. The Millennium Challenge account also consider Togo to be one of the best countries in terms of reform. So, the reforms are happening, okay? But have we already converted this into concrete results in terms of investment and opportunities? Indeed, it is true that the issue of the business climate has come to the fore in Togo, as I told you about the debt problem. From the moment the state no longer has its capacities, the private sector, if we want to continue to develop the country, must have the possibility and the opportunities to invest, right? So that was one of the main motivations. Togo has set up certain structures such as a business climate unit and a delivery unit to deal with problems that private companies may encounter. The state also has a permanent dialogue framework with the private sector. And then it is true, Togo looks a lot at the good practices that are done in countries that excel in this area. A country like Rwanda, Togo has a good cooperation with its authorities in this area. That I believe that Togo plans to go forward because its ambition is great. Since it is 2/3 of the National Development Plan that Togo wishes to be able to finance by the private sector, provide opportunities. Among these opportunities, we can mention the privatization of the telecom company. We can also mention the opening of the capital of the NSCT company to the private sector, in particular to the Singaporean group, Olam International. In French language, NSCT stands for Nouvelle Société Cotonnière du Togo, which means New Cotton Company of Togo, okay? And other privatizations will also follow, because as recognized by His Excellency President Fonyasimbe, the weight of the states in the economy is too important. It is necessary to make room for the private sector. In addition to this improved business environment, there are business opportunities in industry, agriculture, and other infrastructure areas. I will reveal to you, dear ladies and gentlemen, the main business opportunities in Togo very soon to other capsules. I promise it, okay? Now, I mentioned the presence of several banks in Togo. So, I would like to invite you listen to the testimony of the CEO of EcoBank, His Excellency Mr. Ade Ayeyemi, as a witness, because EcoBank is based in Lomé. It is one of the largest multinationals based in Lomé. EcoBank is the largest Pan-African bank in terms of coverage, geographical coverage, and also one of the largest in terms of operations. So it's very important, in my opinion, to seize the opportunity of having the reading of the CEO of EcoBank. Why EcoBank is there in Togo, I mean. Why is Togo an important location for businesses like this? And why Togo maybe is positioning itself as reformer that should be, basically taken into account by EcoBank and others, of course. Okay? There we go.
And all the leaders of Togo government that are here, and also all the interested parties in Africa that are here. Thank you for being here on behalf of the continent. EcoBank was formed 31 years ago, and we've been in Togo for the last 31 years. I joined EcoBank close to 4 years ago. So what I'm going to tell you is just 31 years of EcoBank and nearly 4 years of myself. Observation about Togo and why it is. Because I asked myself the question when I was offered the role. I've never been to Togo in my life. I don't speak French. And therefore, I cannot live in Togo. But I've been convinced for the last 4 years, one, for ECOWAS to be formed. ECOWAS was formed, it was a decision led between Togo and another country. Now, you always think that when a country is physically, geographically small, they tend to want to protect itself and don't want to integrate with others. So the outward looking of Togo in the formation of ECOWAS ensures that you have a market that is very large, close to 400 million people, and people remember that history. The second is, I used to work for a bank and I see all the letters of credit. It says ex-Lomé. And then I ask myself, so why ex-Lomé? And the reason why it's ex-Lomé is because the port in Lomé is very good, is very efficient. And that port, therefore, serves all the countries in the neighborhood. And they say, okay, that's very good, but what about living conditions there? I bear testimony, I live there with my family, and I've never been to Togo until August 2015. I've always been that Nigerian that flies over the West Africa. So I tell you that it's a country that is welcoming. It's a country that is in the heart of ECOWAS, close to 400 million people. So you are making that decision on should we invest in Togo? Don't look at Togo statistics in terms of population. That population is a proxy for demand. That demand is 400 million people across West Africa. I sit in my office every day. I see trucks moving. I see things being done at the port. And I see ships that are parked that are going to discharge in the port of Togo. But those ships, those trucks, they are moving to the hinterland because Togo is well connected to the rest of the countries in the continent. And therefore, the next set of questions is, so we've got a port, we've got a good airport, we've got logistics, but we need to make sure that a lot of this now starts staying within the country. How do we make sure we invest in processing for those agricultural output so that it can then go out and go to the rest of the world? How do we make sure those expatriates that are here, they are able to buy things in Togo rather than going to Dubai? By the way, most of the people that buy things in Dubai, they are from Nigeria. And I've told you that Nigerians, Togo is home for them because that's where I live and I feel at home. Therefore, your investment conversation and decision, the country is open, the country is supportive of investment. EcoBank has been here for 31 years. And we are happy with the support of the state of Togo. Now, I feel very safe. My family feel very safe, and I drive around the country. Therefore, whoever comes to the country should feel very safe. Yes, I'm from Lagos. You say it takes little to make a Lagosian feel safer than Lagos, right? But quite honestly, I used to live in Johannesburg, so I feel relatively safer in Togo. And the support of the government, the access to the government leadership. The access to the president is good, but the access to the leadership, the willingness to listen, the willingness to convert, and make sure that we do everything in the best interest of the country is what has sustained us in Togo to be headquartered in Togo and be able to run 40 countries across Africa.
Thank you.
Well, many thanks for this very interesting insight coming from someone who has that experience dealing with Togo. It was very informative, and I'm sure you, ladies and gentlemen, really enjoyed his presentation. Next time, as I said, I will reveal to you the main business opportunities in Togo through other capsules. That's my promise for those who are interested in going deeper in the knowledge of the opportunities in our country, Togo. That will be all for today. If you have any questions or comments, please, you can leave them below this video. I will be very happy to take care of them. Many thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.